Welcome back to Marvelous Videos. I'm Rylan, and today we'll be taking a look at the House movie franchise, Explored. What makes the House franchise one of the weirdest horror franchises? Well, the fact that all the 4 films are entirely different from one another and practically have nothing in common except the title. There are hardly any returning characters, and even when they do return, they display entirely different backstories in the film, despite being starred by the same actor. The filmmakers deserve some credit for caring at least about the franchise's continuity. Out of the 4 films that constitute this bizarre franchise, the top scorer would definitely be the first film, that was released in 1986 and was written by Ethan Wiley and directed by Steve Milner. Steve Milner is of course very well known for directing Friday the 13th, parts 2 and 3, as well as Lake Placid. The film stars William Katt, George Wendt, Richard Moll, among others. The film centers around the author, Roger Cobb, who went to live in his deceased aunt's house and encountered monsters therein. The second movie in the franchise is House 2, the second story, released in 1987. Written, once again, and this time also directed by Ethan Wiley, inspired by a story by Fred Dekker. Here the story involves Jesse and his friend Charlie, who decided to unearth his ancestor's corpse to seek a powerful ancient Aztec skull. The film stars Arye and Jonathan Stark as the lead roles. House 3 The Horror Show, released in 1989, was directed by James Isaac and David Blyth. The film stars Lance Henriksen, Brion James, and Rita Taggart, and focuses on the policeman Lucas, whose house was haunted by an executed killer. The last film of the franchise is House 4, directed by Lewis Abernathy, starring Terri Treas, William Katt, and others, and follows the family of Roger Cobb, who unknowingly moves into a haunted house. So let's take a moment now and recap the plots of each film of the House franchise, one by one. Before we get into today's explanation, however, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is just a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thanks. Now, let's begin. Horror has found a new home. House, 1985. The movie's first scene displayed the house of House, which was actually found in Morovia, California. The production team spent 4 weeks remodeling it according to their requirement. As the grocer boy entered the house to deliver, he was horrified to find that the owner of the house, Elizabeth, had committed suicide. We are then introduced to our protagonist, Roger Cobb, who was an author and the nephew of the deceased Elizabeth. He was under pressure to write another novel by his publisher, but to everybody's disappointment, Roger decided to write a book on his experiences in the Vietnam War. Roger appeared to be pretty troubled and frustrated at his son after he went missing from Aunt Elizabeth's house 3 years ago. After the incident, he left the house and had looked for his son in every possible way for the past 3 years. Roger's life had come to a standstill, and no matter how hard he tried, he was unable to concentrate on his writing. He had even grown very distant from his wife Sandy, who was an actress. Roger visited his aunt's house with a broker the following day, which he initially thought of selling. Upon visiting the garden, he remembered the day 3 years ago when he was looking after the plants, and Jimmy was playing nearby with his toys. Suddenly, Jimmy had vanished, and when Roger started looking for him, he found Jimmy drowning in the swimming pool. Roger had immediately dived into the pool to save Jimmy, but he seemingly vanished from the pool. The police didn't believe that Jimmy could simply disappear from such a small pool, and were sure about being kidnapped. Meanwhile, Aunt Elizabeth insisted that the house was responsible for Jimmy's disappearance, but everyone thought that she was mentally unstable. The broker took Roger into the storeroom, where he saw the last painting of Elizabeth. The artwork displayed a grandfather clock exactly at 12 o'clock, and a closet opening to another dimension. A part of the painting was covered, but Roger didn't pay any more attention to it. Instead, he recollected the beautiful moments he had spent with his family and decided to start living in the house once again. Roger started writing his experiences in the Vietnam War, remembering his team and his comrades, especially Big Ben, who was killed in the war. He was engrossed in writing when he heard his son's voice. He followed the voice and opened the closet, and guess who was there? A deformed monster who attacked him, as Roger somehow managed to escape. He began to set up many traps to fight the monsters, and even told his neighbor Harold about everything, but Harold thought that Roger had just lost it due to his excessive stress. Soon, strange things started happening in the house. Roger was attacked by a swordfish hanging on the wall, followed by tools like axes, hammers, and others. Then, he was visited by his wife Sandy, but even she transformed into a monster as well, and was killed by Roger. In the meantime, Roger befriended another neighbor, Tanya, who left his son Robert with him for babysitting. As Roger left little Robert to watch TV, 3 little critters appeared and tried to take Robert through the chimney. However, Roger managed to save him and take him for a bath. Consequently, Roger convinced Harold to fight the monsters with him, but he was frozen with shock while Roger was taken back with the monster to the time when Big Ben was dying. Ben had begged Roger to kill him before the enemies could lay their hands on him, but Roger was unable to kill him. The enemies took him and tortured him for 7 days before killing him. When Roger returned to the real world, he carefully watched Aunt Elizabeth's painting, and when he removed the covering from the top corner of the artwork, he saw Jimmy's face painted behind the bathroom medicine cabinet. He broke the mirror of the bathroom cabinet and landed in another dimension where he found Jimmy locked in a cage. He brought Jimmy back to the real world, and this time, the skeleton of Big Ben appeared, who was the actual mastermind behind all the incidents. He was desperate to take revenge on Roger, who he thought was responsible for his suffering. As Roger stopped being scared of Big Ben, he grew weaker, and Roger finally threw a grenade at him, which caused a massive explosion.
No, I'll get you for this!
Sandy arrived at the spot, ecstatic to reunite with her son. Roger simply smiled victoriously as the house kept burning. This horror comedy comes as a pleasant surprise from the director and producer of serious slasher films like Friday the 13th. In fact, the original screenplay by Fred Dekker had no humor at all. Ethan Wiley added all the comedy as he rewrote the script. The film was made on a budget of around $3 million, while it begged about $22 million at the box office. 17 special effects artists designed the 7 monsters that appeared in the film for 3.5 months. In spite of being a comedy, the film managed to generate some scary moments, while the innovative storyline, including the post-war trauma of Roger, makes House a great watch. Director Steve Milner received a Critics Award for the film, while being nominated for the International Fantasy Film Award. A whole new house with all new owners. House 2, The Second Story, 1987. We have a whole new house for you in House 2, The Second Story, which belonged to our protagonist, Jesse McLaughlin. He arrived at his ancestral mansion with his girlfriend Kate, and was soon joined by his goofy friend Charlie Coryell and his girlfriend Lana. The house bore a sad memory as Jesse's parents were murdered by an unknown entity, and he was just a baby. Though Jesse seemed to have a gala time in this mansion with his friends, in reality, the mansion used in the movie is called the Stimson House and is located in California, built in 1891, and was the home of Chicago business financier Thomas Douglas Stimson. While meddling through the old things in the basement, Jesse found a photo of his great-great-grandfather standing in front of an Aztec temple, holding a crystal skull in his hands, whose eyes were made of sapphire. Another person was also in the photo, who Jesse learned was Slim Reeser, former partner of his great-great-grandfather. But Reeser had turned into a bitter enemy over the dispute over the ownership of the skull. Hoping to retrieve the skull, Jesse and Charlie decided to unearth his ancestor's grave when the corpse attacked them. After revealing his identity as his great-great-grandson, Jesse managed to befriend the corpse and took the cowboy zombie back to their mansion. He was nicknamed as Gramps, while he was absolutely horrified to discover his degenerated looks, blaming the skull for not rejuvenating him properly. It is hard to believe that Royal Dano, featuring Gramps, had heart surgery before filming, as he seemed to put his entire heart into the role. Gramps enthusiastically narrated stories of the Old West, while he added that the stones from the Aztec temple had been used to build the house that they were living in. The rooms of the house acted as a hidden doorway to another dimension, while the skull was the key to that door. He warned them against the evil forces desperate to acquire the skull, and handed them the charge to defend it. Soon, Charlie decided to throw a Halloween party, where Gramps also showed up, but his attire was merely taken as a Halloween costume. Unfortunately, a barbarian sort of a person arrived at the party from the Stone Age and stole the skull. Hello everyone, he was not an ordinary person. You must have remembered him playing Jason Voorhees 4 times. Well, he was also the stunts coordinator in most of the films. Jesse and Charlie followed him to a room, leading them to a Stone Age jungle. The man was about to kill Charlie, but an animal killed him instead. And don't ask, we don't know what the animal was. Later, a pterodactyl snatched the skull and carried it to its nest, where a baby pterodactyl was playing with it. As Jesse tried to retrieve the skull from the baby pterodactyl, Jesse and Charlie crashed into another room of the mansion. The baby pterodactyl carried the skull, and an adorable caterpillar dog was also retrieved beneath the rubble. We never knew that such creatures existed in the Stone Age. Amidst all this commotion, there was a misunderstanding between Jesse and Kate. while Kate left with her boss and Lana. At least Gramps was happy that he got back his skull. But no, a few Aztec warriors appeared out of nowhere, hit Gramps, and went away with the skull. This time, an electrician, part-time adventurer, Bill Towner, came to repair a faulty electrical line, broke a wall, reached the dimension where the Aztec warriors took the skull, and were about to sacrifice the Aztec Virgin. Fighting the Aztec warriors by Jesse, Charlie, and Bill was a piece of cake, as they took the skull safely back to Gramps once again, and the Virgin seemed to like Jesse and fell for him promptly. As they all sat for dinner, from the dining table emerged the final antagonist, Slim Reeser, who shot Gramps, took the skull, made the Aztec Virgin his hostage, and promptly escaped. Finally, we have found the link between the two films of the franchise. Like the previous film, the leading antagonist appeared just before the climax. Slim also revealed that he was the one responsible for murdering his parents. Enraged, Jesse jumped through a window and landed at the Old West, and ensued a vigorous battle with Slim, where finally he managed to blast his head. The police finally shot the headless Slim and killed him. Gramps gave a final warning about the skull's power to Jesse, and then passed away. Jesse traveled back to the Old West, kept the skull in Gramps' new grave while he drove away with Charlie, his new girlfriend, and the two pets on a new adventure. House 2, the second story, with a PG rating, is a family film where the kids can also enjoy the movie. There was hardly any horror elements or gore in the film. Even a comic book was adapted from the film by Marvel Comics, which Ralph Macchio wrote. A different Ralph Macchio, mind you, not the Karate Kid. Ethan Wiley was given 2 weeks to write the script. Though the film did reasonably well in the box office and didn't get a fair review from the critics, overall, the film is quite lighthearted and entertaining. After all, even the kids require a horror movie every once in a while.
Now it's my turn to watch you die.
This time, we're not kidding. The Horror Show, 1989. If you consider House and House 2 as the North Pole, then House 3, or The Horror Show, is definitely the South Pole. In fact, the producers have also marketed this film as unrelated to the House series. There is absolutely no comedy in it at all. In fact, it is an intense slasher horror standalone film with nothing, and we mean nothing, linked with the previous films apart from the producer, Sean S. Cunningham, and, of course, a haunted house. The film commenced on a dark and windy night. Detective Lucas got out of bed, restless as he started checking his house thoroughly. He checked on his sleeping son Scott, but before he could look in on his daughter Bonnie, he was bothered by some noise. He followed the noise with a gun, but finally found his cat Cosmo making the noise. But still, Lucas went on to the basement to ensure that everything was fine. As he stared at the fire in the furnace, we were taken on a flashback and informed about the reason of his restlessness. Earlier, Lucas and his partner Casey had followed the infamous serial killer, meat cleaver Max, Jenke. As Lucas entered Max's house, we soon realized how deadly, brutal, and demented our antagonist was. There were body parts everywhere, in the fryer, grinder, and even a decapitated head of another detective on a plate. Later, Max also chopped off Casey's arms while he decapitated a young girl who was his hostage. Lucas was awakened from the nightmare and also started strangling his wife Donna, as Lucas hallucinated her face as Max's. We understood that Lucas had been tormented with frequent nightmares and hallucinations, for which he was also undergoing psychotherapy. It was not clear whether the incidents were nightmares or flashbacks, but one thing was clear, that he was the officer who had finally captured Max. The next day, Lucas went to watch the execution of Max, whose last request was to be buried with the meat cleaver that he had used to slaughter most of his victims. But no matter how much they increased the voltage of the electric chair, Max wouldn't die, and only seemed to get stronger. Finally, his body caught fire, and before dying, he warned Max that he would be coming back for revenge. In the crowd, there was a Professor Peter Campbell, who went to the morgue. There he experienced sudden electrical impulses and power surges, and realized that Max had turned into some sort of supernatural being. Eventually, the paranormal Max entered the furnace in the basement of Lucas's house. Campbell even tried to warn Lucas about his experience and Max's return, but Lucas didn't pay him any attention. But we could see that his hallucinations about Max continued while he was about to collide with a truck. Meanwhile, Bonnie's boyfriend Vinny was hiding in the basement, hoping to spend the night with Bonnie when her parents went out for dinner, but was brutally murdered by the physical manifestation of Max. When Bonnie went down to meet Vinny, he was nowhere to be found. As she started looking for Vinny throughout the house with Scott, Lucas received a threatening call from Max. As Lucas went to the basement, the haunted furnace started threatening Lucas once again. As Lucas shouted, "You stay away from my daughter, you piece of..." Bonnie and Scott were certain that Lucas had found Vinny and was furious with him. When Bonnie confessed to her family about Vinny hiding in the basement, Lucas confirmed that he was not talking to anybody in the basement. The life of Lucas and his family turned into a nightmare when Lucas began to see Max's face everywhere around him, even in the roasted turkey and television shows, when Lucas finally freaked out and started getting violent all the time. He went back to his therapist and decided to visit Max's home. But who did he meet there? Professor Campbell, as he stated his theory about the present situation. So Campbell had been working on a view of a pure evil form of electromagnetic energy. Max had used his own homemade electric chair to build his resistance to the electric execution chair and force them to raise the voltage, which didn't actually kill him, but put him on a higher level of existence with ghostly powers. Who would have thought that Max had such in-depth knowledge of science? Back at Lucas's house, Bonnie received a call from Vinny, calling her to the basement, where Bonnie discovered the mutilated corpse of Vinny. The primary suspect was Lucas, as police arrested him for questioning while informing him that Campbell was also dead. After all the hide and seek, Max finally revealed himself and commenced his attacks on Scott, Bonnie, and Donna. Lucas escaped from police custody and reached home, where he found his kids in miserable conditions and his wife kidnapped. Through the furnace, Lucas got pulled into Max's afterlife dimension, where Campbell's decapitated head instructed him to put Max to more electric shocks and bring him back to his physical form before his head exploded. Lucas and Donna acted exactly the way they were told. They managed to electrocute Max to an extent where he was back in his physical form, and Lucas managed to shoot him and finally kill the devil inside him after all. The family finally sold the house and moved on as they all lived happily ever after. House 3 is back with adult horror, with bloody gore, brutal murders, and spine-chilling terrors that are expected from any horror movie. The best thing that happened to the movie was Lance Henriksen taking the responsibility of the entire film on his shoulders. The concept of an electrical ghost was quite innovative, but the plot slackens at many points. The movie could have been a lot more interesting with a better antagonist, without the hideous laughter, though Brion James did love his character. The film is one of 3 films that were released in 1989 and 1990 that had the plot of a serial killer come back to life after being executed. The other films were Shocker in 1989 and The First Power, released in 1990. The movie also had to delete several scenes to avoid an X rating. The Horror Show, or House 3, may not have lived up to the expectations of the horror fans, but hey, we have seen way worse. Step into Terror, House 4, 1992. With this movie, we come to the end of the House. The House franchise, of course. House 4, or as it's more widely known, House 4 The Repossession, sees the return of William Katt as Roger Cobb, but with a different wife, Kelly, a daughter, Laurel, instead of Jimmy, and a different house inherited from his father and not from his dear Aunt Elizabeth. However, his stepbrother Burke intended to sell the house for a lot of money. Roger was not interested. As the family happily organized the house, they were visited by an old spiritual guide, Ezra, who told them that the Great Spirit would guide them in the house. While he seemed genuinely happy that Roger refused to sell the house, Burke tried to convince his brother once more, stating that he had already made a deal with someone about the house, but Roger had intended to keep the family house. Burke finally said goodbye to his brother and got inside his car. We could see that 2 goons were also inside the car. As Roger and his family left the house, Ezra went inside, while in the basement there was a secret chamber containing a mystical seal. As the family drove, their car suddenly burst a tire, and the car toppled and crashed. Kelly somehow managed to save Laurel, but before she could save Roger, the car exploded, and Roger did not survive. Kelly decided to move into Roger's ancestral house with Laurel, whose legs were now paralyzed due to the accident. As the mother and daughter tried settling down in the house, Kelly injured her hand with the glass of the window. She tried washing her wound, but the taps were all clogged. Suddenly, a woman, Verna Klump, appeared from nowhere and claimed to be the housekeeper of the house. Kelly was sure that her father had arranged for the housekeeper for her convenience. As Kelly went to the basement to check some noise, she fell, and her flashlight slipped onto the mystical seal. Kelly couldn't see the seal, but she lowered her wounded hand to get the flashlight. Soon, Kelly found that her wound had magically healed itself. Kelly decided to go for a yard sale, where Burke showed up, again with the dangerous men, and tried every possible way to convince Kelly to sell the house. Soon, Kelly began to experience spooky incidents, like a hand grabbing her from the floor, and a pizza turning into a monster face. This is just a small note to inform you that the monster pizza face was Kane Hodder, making a special appearance one more time. After a massive fight with the pizza, Kelly decided to take a hot shower, but the audience could see the red-hot blood coming out of the shower. As the paranormal experiences drive Kelly crazy, she decided to consult Ezra about it. Ezra stated that all these activities are because Roger's spirit is stuck between the living and the dead, as someone else was responsible for his death. We now see that Burke had made a deal with Mr. Grosso, quite a bad guy, who wanted to expand his forbidden business of toxic waste. So this time, Burke sends his goons to attack Laurel, but soon a lamp, which Laurel had nicknamed Algernon, turned into a dog and chased them away, while Laurel fell down the stairs in the process. As Laurel was admitted to the hospital with not-so-serious injuries, she admitted that she didn't want to go back to the house. So, Kelly called up Burke to make a deal about the house. As Kelly slept alone that night, the projector started on its own, projecting the videos of all the sweet moments spent by the family, while Kelly realized that she had been haunted by her husband all along. Kelly also realized that it was Burke who had initiated the accident and was responsible for Roger's death. So, she promptly canceled the deal with Burke, but he wasn't willing to give up so easily. Desperate Burke sent his men to burn down the house, but these people had forgotten that they were up against a ghost. They were manipulated to shooting themselves, but the house caught fire anyway. Kelly somehow managed to reach Laurel, but as they tried to pull themselves away from the fire, the mystical seal exploded with magical water, which didn't put out the fire, but it did cure Laurel of her paralysis. Burke was arrested by Verna Klump, who was actually a secret agent disguised as a housekeeper. House 4 returns to the usual fun-filled comedy horror that is expected from the House franchise, though there is some blood and nudity associated with it. The house itself is quite spooky, and is very appropriate with the storyline. The special effects are pretty good, generating some spooky moments occasionally. Terri Treas gave an excellent performance as our central character. It is considered as the weakest film of the franchise, with neither prominent comedy nor horror, or even the supernatural aspect of the movie. Yet, once in a while, it's okay to watch a movie such as this, which is made for just sheer entertainment. Why should you watch the House movies? If you want to take it from us, you should watch the House movies just for fun, with the exception of the third film, which can be watched for the sake of horror, if you choose to go that route. The first two films are pretty enjoyable and lighthearted and will lift your mood. But take it from us, you should definitely see it to its end if you ever start this journey. So, if you've at least seen the first two movies, you can at least try to complete watching the rest of the franchise. After all, it is your house. You can do whatever you want with it. If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to send a like and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. For marvelous videos, I'm Rylan. Have a good one. Be safe.